Hi, welcome. This is Brendan again from Views on Brews, and this is going to be the first video in a series of videos that I'll put up on YouTube as a playlist for learning how to brew, basically. I've been all grain brewing for 5 years, and I've used the same setup. You might have a different setup, but one of the things I really like to have full control of is milling my grain, and this is my setup for it. An old fermentation bucket, the grain mill, which is an attachment on the side, normally has a crank handle there, but you just take that off because it would take forever, and a €40 drill that I picked up in Woodies, and that's all you need to do. So I've got here a little plate full of different grains, just to show you. This is one of the things you need to think about when milling your own malt, that not all grains are the same size. So we've got barley here, which is the grain that you're most likely to be malting in your mill, but also you've got a much smaller grain of rye here, and wheat that's roughly in between the two, but the wheat one tends to be a lot harder, so you might want to mill that one twice. But the most important thing to think about when you're milling your malts is that if you are going to do different grains, mill them separately and then add them in afterwards. That way you get total control over what size they come out. The wheat one, as I said, will be the hardest one to put through. You might need to put it through a couple of times, and then this rye one actually might be very difficult to do as well, because you're going to have to mill it a lot finer, which might put a bit of pressure on your drill. So the milling bucket, this is just an old fermentation bucket that I don't use anymore. It's got too many scratches on the inside, so that makes a perfect milling bucket. No need to buy anything particularly special. You can mill into absolutely anything you want. I've still got a bit of grainy powder out here, but I'll give it a dust down, but I don't worry too much about being a fine layer of dust on it, because I've got a lid on it. The lid, I've just cut out a square bit on the top of it, just to match the underside of my mill, so that when it sits off the end, I can attach the drill on the end and just mill the grain away. I'll just quickly show you now the mill that I have. Two rollers in the bottom there. They're just released open by these two clamping systems, and at either side of the mill you'll find there's an exact way to measure the width of each roller, and at both ends there. And then when you get that roll so that it's even both sides of the rollers, then all you do is you clamp these back down again, and then you have your perfect set. Yeah, so anytime that you want to increase or decrease the roller width inside your mill, you just turn these knobs just slightly. Just be careful that you try to make the same turn on the left side as that you do on the right side, so the width of the rollers inside is the same all the way across the rollers. That's quite important, because you could end up with some of your grain too coarse and some of it too fine, and you can just play around with that setting until you get the right width, well, the right crusher grain, and that's all it is. And you can see it just fits on here. I didn't need to use the screw fittings that you can use on the bottom of your mill, whichever mill you have. You can attach it to there, or a plank of wood over an open bucket. But this is just the system I have. And then I just take my drill, open it up to the widest setting, put it onto my roller, secure it tightly, not too tightly. If it's too tightly, you can end up if it's too tight, you can end up with a stuck drill on the end of your attachment here. Just happened a couple of times to me. And then, as you can see, you just drill it like that. You want it on a low torque, but on the hammer setting, or at least that's what I use on the hammer setting. The low torque means it can grab hold of the grain and crush it. Okay. So, once you have your grain weighed up and separated into different cereal malts, put it into a bowl. I like to start off with just a small amount of malt into the mill to begin with, and the reason I do that is just so that I can have a look at and see what I've milled, and if I'm happy with the grind and the coarseness of the grind. Then all you need to do is just take off your mill for a second, put it somewhere safe, and check the coarseness of the grain. This is where I think a lot of brewers make a mistake. Milling it too fine will lead to a lot of the dust. You can see a small bit of dust here that was there from before. Milling it too fine will make too much dust, which will end up giving you a stuck sparge in your mash. But milling it too coarse will not be as efficient in extracting all of the fermentable sugars that you can in your mash. So it's a fine balance that you need to get between the two, and we'll just take a closer look at that now. Yeah, so this is just a closer look at the same grain to give you an idea. This is pretty much as fine as I would crush my grain ever. You can crush it a bit less if you feel that you are happy with whatever extraction rate you're going to get out of it and you're not too fussed about hitting all your numbers, but I find this is just the right coarseness of grain there. Hopefully the camera picks that up. Once I've milled all of the grain, then I just pop the lid onto my bucket, stuff a little bag in here so that I can leave it overnight and be sure that nothing gets in there, and be ready to brew straight away on brew day morning. The last thing that you probably want to have a think about before you mill your own grains is how you're going to store the rest of your grains that you have left over. It makes a lot of sense to buy the grains in a bulk amount. I have 25 kilos of this particular grain. You can just tie it off with a piece of string there. As long you can see there's two thicknesses to this bag, so I'm not going to get any moisture in the bag. The whole idea of storing your grains properly is that you try to reduce the amount of possibility of moisture getting in. So dry, dark area, preferably in a sealed container such as this, and then you can pop that in there, put your lid on top, and you're away. That's how I store all my grains, and they last for ages. So the key points of milling your own grain: make sure you separate all of the different types of malts that you have. That doesn't matter so much when you're malting different speciality malts, as long as they're the same cereals. Get a cheap enough drill. You don't need to spend the earth. You don't need to spend 200 euros on a drill that has a really big torque on it. Store your grain in containers, sealed containers, preferably in the bag that the grain was purchased in, so you're giving it extra protection. Weigh out your malts and mill them the day before you're going to brew. If you do it on the same day, you can run into all kinds of problems. Like a couple of times I've tried to mill my malts and I've ended up having to wait for the battery charger to charge up before I can actually use the drill on the malt. I even resorted to using the crank handle once because I was that impatient. So do it all the night before. Same with the brew and water. Have that all ready on the night before, so you can just walk down the stairs in the morning, put the kettle on, hit the switch on your brewing setup, and then go back upstairs and have a cup of tea and wake up normally, and let all the process happen very, very smoothly for the brew day. Try not to over mill your malt. It's better to play around with a small amount of malt so you get used to your grain crushing mill. And if you do over mill your malts, I would consider adding rice husks to your brew. It won't affect any of your efficiencies. It might actually help them to break down and not create such a fine grain filter on your grain bed. That should help you if you're getting a stark mash. But other than that, don't go the opposite way, which is too coarse. If you do it too coarse, you're going to end up with not hitting the efficiencies that you want in order to get the correct alcohol content in your finished beer. That messes up all of the bitterness, the ratio of bitterness, the balance in the malt, the mouthfeel, and the ABV. Other than that, you just need to play around with a mill and get used to it. I've messed it up a couple of times, but it's all part of learning, it's all part of the fun, so just go ahead and enjoy it.